Hey everyone, I'm Kim and welcome to Crime Stats Daily. This is a channel where we go beyond the headlines to examine the facts, the statistics, and the stories behind crime in America. Our goal is simple: to separate myth from reality using reliable data and credible research. If you enjoy fact based crime analysis, please follow, subscribe, and join me here each week as we look at the numbers behind the crime. So let's get started. Imagine someone you love is murdered. The police respond immediately. Detectives begin collecting evidence. Witnesses are interviewed. The crime scene is processed. Everyone expects an arrest, but days become weeks, and weeks become months, and then months become years. And eventually, the investigation grows quiet: no arrest, no conviction, no answers. And for thousands of families across the US, this isn't a television drama, it's real life. And every year, millions of crimes are reported to law enforcement agencies across the US, and many are solved quickly. Others take months, some take years, and some are never solved at all. Today, we're going to explore one of the most misunderstood topics in criminal justice. Why do some crimes remain unsolved? Is it because detectives gave up? Is there simply not enough evidence? Are police departments overwhelmed? Or is the answer much more complicated? Today, we'll examine what the numbers actually tell us, and just as important, what they do not. Now, before we begin, here's what we'll cover today. First, we'll explain what investigators mean when they use the term clearance rate. And then we'll look at why time is one of the biggest enemies of any criminal investigation. We'll discuss the challenges detectives face every day as they balance dozens of active cases. We'll compare Hollywood's version of criminal investigations with reality. And we'll examine the latest FBI clearance statistics. And finally, we'll talk about how ordinary citizens have helped solve cases that seemed once impossible. And by the end of today's episode, you'll understand why these numbers are so important and why they don't always tell the entire story. Now, let's begin with a term that is often misunderstood. What is a clearance rate? And many people believe that when a crime is cleared, it means someone was convicted in court, and that's not actually what it means. According to the FBI, a crime is considered cleared when investigators identify the offender and make an arrest, or have enough evidence to make an arrest, but are prevented from doing so because of circumstances beyond their control. So, for example, a suspect may die before charges can be filed, or prosecutors may decide not to proceed for legal reasons, even though investigators identified the offender. Those situations are called exceptional clearances. So, remember this important point: a clearance is not the same as a conviction. Likewise, an uncleared case doesn't necessarily mean that detectives stopped working. Some investigations remain active for years, even decades, as investigators continue to follow new leads, review evidence, and wait for advances in technology. Understanding that distinction is the first step toward understanding today's statistics. Now, when people think about modern crime solving, they often picture technology doing all the work: DNA evidence, facial recognition, surveillance cameras, cell phone records, license plate readers, digital forensics. And while these tools have transformed criminal investigations, technology is not a magic solution. For technology to help, investigators first need evidence to analyze. if no DNA was left behind, if there were no surveillance cameras, if witnesses never saw the suspect, technology has very little to work with. Even when DNA is recovered, investigators still need someone to compare it to. And sometimes that comparison happens immediately. Other times it may take years before a suspect's DNA is entered into a database. Digital evidence presents its own challenges. A cell phone can reveal valuable information, but investigators often need search warrants, technical experts, and weeks or even months to analyze the data. And security cameras don't always capture the crime. Sometimes the image quality is poor. Sometimes cameras aren't working. Sometimes they're simply pointing in the wrong direction. Technology has made investigations better, but it hasn't made them easy. Technology is one of the most powerful tools available to investigators, but even the best technology cannot recover evidence that was never left behind. Now, if there's one thing detectives wish they can control, and that is time. The first few hours after a crime are often the most important. Every minute matters. Witnesses begin forgetting details almost immediately. Evidence can be lost through weather, footprints disappear, tire tracks fade, DNA degrades, digital recordings may automatically be erased. Security camera footage is often overwritten within days. People move, phone numbers change, businesses close, neighborhoods change, and as time passes, finding reliable evidence becomes more difficult. That's one reason investigators encourage witnesses to come forward as quickly as possible. A detail that seems unimportant today could become the missing piece months later. Imagine trying to remember exactly where you were, say 3 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon. Most of us couldn't do it. Now imagine asking a witness to remember the face of someone they saw for only a few seconds. That's the challenge detectives face every day. The longer a case remains unsolved, the harder it often becomes to solve. But that doesn't mean detectives stop trying. Some investigations continue for decades, and advances in DNA testing and forensic genealogy have solved cases that once seemed impossible. Did you know that some cold cases have been solved more than 40 years after the crime occurred because new forensic technology became available? That's why many agencies continue reviewing old evidence. Now, television often gives us the impression that detectives work one case at a time, and that's it until it's solved. In real life, it's very different. Most detectives are responsible for multiple investigations at the same time. While they're investigating one homicide, a robbery may occur, a missing person is reported, a shooting happens across town, new evidence arrives in another case. Investigators are constantly balancing competing priorities. Some cases require immediate attention because there's an ongoing threat to public safety. Others involve waiting for laboratory results. And require interviews with dozens of witnesses spread across multiple states. Behind every investigation is a team, a crime scene, crime scene technicians, evidence specialists, laboratory analysts, medical examiners, prosecutors, patrol officers. Each play a role in moving an investigation forward, and every step takes time. This is one reason clearance rates don't tell us how investigations are working. They simply tell us whether a case met the FBI's definition of being cleared. It's an important statistic, but it doesn't measure persistence. It doesn't measure the number of hours investigators spend following leads, and it certainly doesn't measure how much families continue hoping for answers. So, if detectives work so hard, why do some investigations remain open for decades? And that's exactly what we'll explore next as we turn our attention to cold cases and then compare Hollywood's version of crime solving with reality. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions about law enforcement is that unsolved cases are eventually forgotten. In reality, many investigations never truly end. When a case is no longer actively generating new leads, it often is classified as a cold case. But cold doesn't mean abandoned, it simply means there are no immediate leads to pursue. Across the country, detectives regularly reopen older cases when new information becomes available. A witness may finally decide to come forward. Previously unknown DNA technology may reveal a match. Evidence collected decades ago can sometimes be tested using techniques that didn't exist when the crime occurred. In recent years, forensic genetic genealogy has helped investigators identify suspects in cases that have remained unsolved for decades. For many families, those breakthroughs came after years or even decades of uncertainty. Cold case detectives often describe themselves as caretakers of unfinished stories. Their goal is to give victims a voice and to provide families with long awaited answers. Not every case will be solved, but many investigators refuse to stop looking. Sometimes justice simply takes time. Crime, one of the most important, remarkable things about modern investigations is that a case doesn't have to be solved immediately to be solved eventually. Technology changes, evidence improves, and people's memories change. Relationships change, and sometimes one new piece of information is all it takes to reopen a case that once seemed impossible. If you've ever watched a crime drama on TV, you'll probably seen the same pattern. A crime occurs, the detectives collect evidence, a laboratory processes everything almost instantly. Someone confesses, and by the end of the episode, the case is solved. And real investigations rarely work that way. DNA testing can take weeks or longer. Search warrants must be reviewed and approved. Laboratory backlogs can delay results. Witnesses sometimes refuse to cooperate, and investigators often spend countless hours following leads that ultimately go nowhere. Unlike television, there isn't a script. Detectives don't know where the evidence will lead, and sometimes the evidence points in several different directions. Sometimes it points nowhere at all. That uncertainty is one of the hardest parts of criminal investigations. Hollywood tells stories with clear endings. Real life often doesn't. Television measures success in 45 minutes. Real investigations are measured in months, years, and sometimes decades. The goal isn't to solve a case quickly. The goal is to solve it correctly. That difference matters. Now, at this point, you may be wondering, what can someone like me actually do? And the answer is more than you might think. Many investigations have been solved because an ordinary citizen noticed something unusual or decided to share information they had dismissed as unimportant. A neighbor remembers a suspicious vehicle. A former friend recognizes someone in a police sketch. A person finally comes forward after years of remaining silent. Even advances in social media have helped investigators identify witnesses and generate new leads in older cases. Sometimes people don't realize what they know until investigators ask the right question. That's why law enforcement agencies encourage anyone with credible information to report it, even if they're unsure whether it's important. One phone call, one photograph, one conversation, and one memory. Any one of those can change the course of an investigation. If you ever have information about an active investigation, the safest course of action is to contact the investigating law enforcement agency or an established tip line rather than trying to investigate the case yourself. Justice is a partnership. Investigators, forensic scientists, prosecutors, and communities all play a role. When those pieces come together, even the oldest mysteries can sometimes be solved. Now let's look at what the latest FBI data tells us. According to the FBI's Crime in the Nation report, not every reported crime results in an arrest or an identified offender. For violent crimes, the national clearance rate was approximately 43.8%. That remains fewer than half of reported, that means fewer than half of reported violent crimes met the FBI's definition of being cleared during the reported period. For property crimes, the clearance rate was even lower, about 15.9%. At first glance, those numbers may seem discouraging, but remember everything we've discussed today. A clearance rate is not a measure of effort. It doesn't tell us how many hours investigators spent on a case. It doesn't tell us how many leads were followed. It doesn't tell us how many cases remain active. And it certainly doesn't tell us how deeply these crimes affect victims and their families. Instead, the statistic measures one very specific outcome, whether a case met the FBI's definition of being cleared. That's why context matters. Statistics help us understand patterns, but they rarely tell us the entire story. When we combine the numbers with an understanding of how investigations actually work, we gain a much clearer picture of the challenges facing law enforcement today. So, what can we take away from today's episode or discussion? First, solving crime is rarely as simple or as quick as television makes it appear. Every investigation depends on evidence, reliable witnesses, careful forensic work, and often a great deal of patience. Second, technology has transformed criminal investigations, but it cannot replace evidence that doesn't exist. Investigators can only work with the information available to them. And third, time is one of the greatest challenges in any investigation. As memories fade, evidence changes, and circumstances evolve, solving a crime often becomes more difficult. And finally, communities matter. Many cases have been solved because someone decided to come forward with information they thought was insignificant. That one phone call, that one photograph, that one memory, it can all make a difference. When we understand the realities behind crime statistics, we also gain a greater appreciation for the people working every day to seek justice and for the families who continue to wait for answers. Now, before we wrap up, today's one number to remember is 15.9%. That's the national clearance rate for reported property crimes in the FBI's latest annual data. It may seem just like another statistic, but behind that number are thousands of investigations, countless hours of work by law enforcement, and victims hoping for answers. It's also a reminder that crime statistics should never be viewed in isolation. Every percentage represents real people, real investigations, and real communities. Understanding those numbers help us have more informed conversations about crime, public safety, and the criminal justice system. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Crime Stats Daily. If you found today's episode helpful or informative, please consider following, subscribing, and liking this video and sharing it with someone who enjoys fact-based discussions about crime and the criminal justice system. If you have any thoughts on today's topic, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below. What surprised you most about the crime clearance rates? Let me know again in the comment section below. As always, I'll include links to the FBI data and other sources used in today's episode in the description below, so you can explore the information yourself. Until next time, I'm Kim. Stay informed, stay aware, stay safe, and always look beyond the headlines.